Rain poured over the alien city, turning the metal streets into dark rivers that reflected the neon signs above. Daniel pulled his coat tighter, feeling the cold creep into his bones. He didn't belong here. Humans were rare in this part of Zyra, and the looks he got from the towering aliens were never friendly. He kept walking, hoping to find the repair shop that had promised him work. Instead, he found something else, something he couldn't ignore. In the middle of a crowded market, a glass cage stood under a bright light. Inside it, a girl sat on her knees. Her skin shimmered like pale silver under the glow, and her hair, long and white as snow, fell across her face. Her wrists were locked in heavy metal cuffs. A sign above her cage read in bold alien script, "For rent, 1 night only." Daniel froze. He'd seen slaves before on this world, but this wasn't the same. The crowd around her was loud, laughing, pointing, throwing coins at the glass. She ignored them, her head bowed, but when she lifted her eyes, they locked onto his. Her gaze wasn't empty. It was sharp, alive, and filled with something fierce, something that made his chest tighten. An alien merchant with thick tusks noticed him staring. "Human," the merchant growled. "You want her? 1 night. Cheap price for your kind." Daniel's first thought was to turn away. This wasn't his problem, but those eyes wouldn't let him move. He stepped closer to the cage. "What's her name?" he asked. The merchant shrugged. "Not important. You pay. You take her until dawn. No questions. No trouble." The girl's lips moved slightly. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he saw them. She had mouthed something, 2 silent words. "Help me." Before he could think it through, his hand reached for the few credit chips in his pocket. The merchant grinned, snatched the payment, and unlocked the cage. The sound of the metal door opening was sharp in Daniel's ears. She stepped out, her movements slow but steady, the chains around her wrists clinking. They walked through the rain together. She didn't speak, just kept glancing at him from under her wet hair. He took her to the small room he rented above a noisy bar. Inside, the air was warm, and she stood near the heater, rubbing her hands. "You're human," she said at last, her voice soft but edged with something he couldn't name. "And you're?" he asked. "Kalira?" she answered without hesitation. "I was not born for this cage." Daniel didn't press her for more. He could see the bruises on her wrists and the faint scar along her jaw. She moved like someone who had once been free, someone who knew how to stand tall even when forced to kneel. He gave her a towel and some food. She didn't touch the meal at first, just stared at it like she didn't trust it. Then, slowly, she began to eat, her eyes still on him, as if waiting for him to reveal his true reason for bringing her here. "I don't want anything from you," Daniel said finally. "You don't have to." "I know what men who rent me want," she cut in, her voice flat. "If that's not you, then why are you here?" He thought about that. He wasn't sure himself. Maybe it was the way she looked at him in that cage. Maybe it was the way she didn't seem broken like the others. "Because you asked for help," he said simply. Her expression shifted, just slightly. "And you think 1 night can save me?" "No," he admitted. "But maybe it can keep you alive until tomorrow." Silence filled the small room. The hum of the heater was the only sound. Kalira leaned against the wall, studying him with eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted her to. As the hours passed, she told him fragments of her story. She was from a warrior clan far from the city. They had been betrayed, their leaders killed, their people scattered. She had been taken and sold, passed from one hand to another, until she ended up in that cage. Daniel listened, feeling a cold anger in his chest. "Can't you escape?" he asked. Her smile was bitter. "Escape where? This city eats the weak, and a human like you would not last the night outside with me." They spoke until the lights of the city began to fade toward dawn. She stood by the door, the chains on her wrists glinting in the dim light. "When they take me back," she said quietly, "I will be given to someone else tomorrow night. He is not like you. If you don't come back for me, you will never see me again." Daniel felt the weight of her words. The rain outside was slowing, the market would open soon, and her cage would be lit up again. But now he knew her name. He knew her story. And he couldn't forget the way she looked at him, like someone who still had hope, but only for a little while longer. She walked away, led by the merchant who had come to collect her. She didn't look back, but her words stayed with him, cutting deeper than he expected. "If you don't come back tomorrow, I will disappear forever." Daniel sat in his workshop, tools scattered across the table, but his hands were still. The sound of rain tapping against the metal roof only made the room feel smaller. He kept thinking about her, Kalira. Every detail was burned into his mind. The silver of her hair, the fierce look in her eyes, the quiet way she said his name before leaving. He told himself it wasn't his problem. This city was full of people who needed saving. But Kalira wasn't just another stranger. She had asked him for help, and he had done nothing except buy her one night of safety. Now the thought of her being handed to someone else made his chest ache. The streets outside were still wet from the night's storm. Neon lights flickered above the market entrance. Daniel pushed through the crowd, scanning for her cage, but the glass box was empty. The merchant from yesterday was there, polishing the glass. "Where is she?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The merchant smirked. "Already gone, booked for the night. Not your concern, human." "Who booked her?" A low laugh came from the merchant. "A noble. Rich, powerful, likes breaking things that don't belong to him. Your little silver-haired friend won't be the same when he's done." Daniel's jaw tightened. "How long until he takes her?" "She's already on her way," the merchant replied with a cruel smile. "If you want her back, you'll need more than the coins in your pocket. That man doesn't give up his toys." Daniel turned away before the merchant could see the anger in his eyes. He didn't have much, no family here, no real allies, but he knew people who owed him favors. He needed information. He went to the lower docks where cargo ships came and went without questions. There, in a small bar thick with smoke, he found Rask, a wiry alien with scars across his face. Rask was a smuggler, a thief, and a gossip who knew more about the city's underworld than anyone else Daniel trusted. "I need to find someone," Daniel said, sliding into the seat across from him. "An alien girl, silver hair, warrior blood, taken by a noble." Rask raised a brow. "You mean Kalira? Word travels fast, human. That noble, Lord Veyran, has her, and you don't want to get in his way." "I don't care who he is," Daniel said. "Where is he keeping her?" Rask leaned back, swirling his drink. "Veyran's estate is a fortress. Guards with pulse rifles, walls that bite intruders. Even if you get inside, he won't let her go. And if you try to buy her, you'll need enough credits to bankrupt yourself twice over." Daniel's fingers tapped against the table. "Then I'll find the credits." Rask laughed. "That's the stupidest thing I've heard all week. But I like stupid. There's a way. Tomorrow night, there's a gathering, an auction. High class, private, invitation only. Veyron's sending her there. He's going to sell her to the highest bidder. If you want her, that's your only chance." The words hit Daniel like a punch. He had less than a day to gather more money than he'd ever seen in his life. He spent the next hours tearing apart his workshop, gathering everything of value, tools, rare spare parts, even his old engine core. Then he went from trader to trader, selling what he could for credits. Some paid fair, most didn't, but he didn't stop. Every coin, every scrap of value went into the small pouch on his belt. By nightfall, he was still short. He needed more. That's when he made the choice he swore he never would. He walked into the back room of the Black Coil, a den run by alien gangsters. The air smelled of smoke and blood. At the far end, behind a table stacked with illegal tech, sat a tall alien with eyes like burning coals, Boss Dren. Dren smiled when he saw him. "Daniel? You only come here when you're desperate." "I need a loan," Daniel said. Dren leaned forward. "And what do I get if you can't pay it back?" "My ship," Daniel said, the words tasting like ash. The boss's grin widened. "Done." He tossed a small black credit chip onto the table. "But if you fail me, I won't just take your ship. I'll take your hands too." Daniel pocketed the chip without a word. His heart pounded, not from fear of the threat, but from the thought that he might actually have enough now. He returned to his room long after midnight, the pouch of credits heavy against his side. He tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kalira's face, the way she looked at him through the glass. As the first light of morning crept into the city, Daniel made his plan. He would find a way into that auction. He would outbid anyone, even Veyron himself. And if that failed, he would take her by force. He didn't know if he was saving her because it was the right thing to do, or because something inside him refused to let her vanish from his life. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this night be her last. The air in the city felt heavier that day, as if it knew something important was about to happen. Daniel kept his hood low, moving quickly through the crowded streets, clutching the pouch of credits under his coat. He had spent every coin he had and promised more than he could afford to pay back. All for one reason: Kalira. Rask met him near the shadowed entrance of the market, his eyes darting around. "You got the money?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Enough to win." Rask gave a short laugh. "You're too sure of yourself, human. The kind of people at this auction don't care about money alone. They like power. They like showing off. They'd buy her just to see you lose." Daniel ignored the warning. "Just get me inside." The auction was hidden in the old part of the city, deep under an abandoned transport station. Rask led him down narrow staircases and through echoing tunnels until they reached a pair of massive steel doors guarded by aliens in black armor. One scanned Daniel's face, another took his credits for the entry fee. The doors opened with a groan, revealing a huge underground hall glowing with gold and red lights. Dozens of tables surrounded a raised stage in the center. Alien nobles in silk robes and jeweled collars sat drinking and laughing, their voices echoing against the metal walls. At the far end, Daniel saw him, Lord Veyron. Tall, dressed in black with silver patterns, his sharp eyes scanned the crowd like a predator. Daniel took a seat at the back, his gaze locked on the stage. Strange creatures were brought out one by one, rare beasts, stolen art, exotic weapons. The crowd shouted bids, their voices filled with greed. Then the room shifted. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell as two guards brought her out. Kalira. She walked with her chin high, though her wrists were chained. Her silver hair shone under the lights, and her eyes searched the crowd until they found him. For the smallest moment, her expression changed, just a flicker of hope. But then she masked it, standing still as the auctioneer began to speak. "This," the alien auctioneer said, his voice carrying over the room, "is Kalira of the Stormblade clan. A rare find, trained in combat, skilled in multiple tongues, and, as you can see, a beauty beyond price. Bidding starts at 50,000 credits." Daniel's heart pounded as the first bid came from a fat alien in blue robes. Another noble raised it higher. Then Lord Veyron leaned back in his seat, his voice smooth as he offered a number that silenced the crowd. Daniel didn't wait. He raised his hand. 75,000. Heads turned toward him. Whispers rose. A human bidding in this place was a rare sight. Veyron's cold eyes met his, and a thin smile curled on the noble's lips. 80,000. Daniel answered immediately. 90. The auctioneer grinned, sensing a fight. The crowd leaned in, enjoying the game. Veyron sipped his drink before speaking again. 100. Daniel's breath was steady, but inside he was calculating every credit he had left. 120. Gasps rippled through the room. The other bidders dropped out, leaving only the two of them. 150. Veyron said casually, as if it meant nothing to him. Daniel clenched his jaw. 170. Kalira's eyes never left him. The auctioneer's voice was quick now, trying to keep up. 170. Do I hear more? Veyron tilted his head. 200. Daniel's heart sank. That number was almost everything he had. If he went higher, he'd have nothing left to live on. But if he stopped now, she'd be gone forever. He lifted his hand slowly. 220. A hush fell over the hall. The auctioneer's eyes darted between them. Veyron stared at Daniel for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his smile gone. 300. Daniel felt the weight of the pouch at his side. That was it, more than he had. The crowd was already murmuring, some laughing at the human who thought he could outbid a noble. His mind raced. Credits weren't his only bargaining chip. Slowly, he stood. 350, plus this. He pulled a small, worn piece of metal from his coat and held it up. It was a navigation chip from his ship, a rare model that could fetch a fortune in the right hands. The room buzzed with excitement. The auctioneer's eyes widened. 350 in rare tech. Do I hear more? Veyron's jaw tightened. For the first time, he didn't immediately answer. His gaze flicked to Kalira, then back to Daniel. Finally, with a scoff, he leaned back in his chair. Let the human have her. She won't survive long with him anyway. The auctioneer slammed his hand down. Sold! The chains on Kalira's wrists were unlocked, and she stepped down from the stage. She walked straight to Daniel, her eyes steady. You didn't just buy me, she said quietly, so only he could hear. You just made yourself a target. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. Then let them come. The crowd's noise still rang in Daniel's ears as they left the auction hall. The air outside was cold and heavy, and the underground tunnels smelled of rust and damp stone. Kalira walked beside him, her steps steady but her eyes sharp, scanning every shadow. She was free of the chains now, but she didn't relax. He kept his hand close to the pouch of credits he had left. Not much remained, barely enough for food or shelter. But the truth was, he hadn't bought her for comfort. He had bought her because the thought of her going back to Lord Veyron made his stomach turn. They reached a quiet corner of the old station where Rask waited, leaning against the wall. "You did it," Rask said with a crooked grin. "Didn't think you would, but you did." His grin faded when he looked at Kalira. "You know Veyron won't let this go, right? You just humiliated him in front of the richest people in the city." Kalira's voice was calm but cold. "Veyron doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." Daniel didn't need the warning. He could already feel eyes on them, though the hallway seemed empty. "Then we keep moving," he said, guiding her toward the exit. They made their way through the maze of alleys, heading toward the upper districts. The streets were quieter here, lit by flickering street lamps and the glow of shop signs. But the silence felt wrong. Too empty. Too watched. A shadow moved behind them. Then another. Kalira's hand went to the small blade she had hidden under her sleeve. "We're being followed," she murmured. "I know," Daniel replied without looking back. "Keep walking." They turned a corner, and 3 figures stepped out to block their path. All were dressed in dark armor, the symbol of Veyron's house painted on their chests. The tallest one grinned, showing sharp silver teeth. "The noble sends his regards," he said. "Hand her over, and maybe we let you walk away." Daniel's hand tightened around the wrench in his pocket. "Not happening." The armored alien laughed. "You think you can fight us, human?" Before Daniel could move, Kalira stepped forward. Her chains were gone, but the marks on her wrists were still fresh. She didn't care. Her body moved like a blade, fast and precise. In 2 heartbeats, she had kicked the first guard's legs out from under him and slammed her elbow into the second's throat. The third rushed at her with a stun baton, but Daniel swung his wrench hard, knocking the weapon from his hand. The fight was quick and brutal, ending with the guards groaning on the ground. Kalira looked at him, her breath steady. "You're not useless after all," she said. "Remind me to take that as a compliment," he muttered, wiping blood from his knuckles. They didn't stay to see if the guards would get up. Rask led them through a back alley to a hidden door behind a mechanic's shop. Inside was a cramped space with a workbench, old metal parts, and a narrow cot in the corner. "It's not much," Rask said, "but it's safe, for now." Kalira sat on the cot, her gaze fixed on the floor. After a long silence, she spoke. "You didn't just buy me. You bought Veyron's hate. He will send more than guards next time. He will send hunters." Daniel met her eyes. "Then let him. I'm not giving you back." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "Why? Why risk everything for me?" He hesitated, then said, "Because you asked me to come back, and because I couldn't stand the thought of you in that cage again." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she leaned back against the wall, her voice quieter. "Where I'm from, when someone saves your life, you owe them a blood debt. But I don't like debts. I intend to pay it back, in my way." Before he could ask what she meant, Rask came back from the door, his face tense. "Bad news. Word's spreading fast. Veyron's putting a price on your head, both of you. You're not just fugitives now. You're prey." Daniel looked at Kalira. "Then we don't wait for him to come to us. We make the first move." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Now you're starting to think like a warrior." That night, the city outside was alive with danger. Veyron's agents were already searching, but in that small room, Daniel and Kalira began to plan. Not how to run, but how to fight back. The morning light barely touched the streets before Daniel and Kalira slipped out of the mechanic's shop. The air was sharp with the smell of fuel and wet metal. Daniel kept his hood low, his eyes scanning every face in the crowd. Kalira walked beside him, her silver hair hidden under a dark scarf, her posture alert like a soldier in enemy territory. They didn't have a real plan yet, only one goal: stay ahead of Veyron's hunters. But in a city like this, every corner could hide danger. They moved through the maze of narrow streets toward the lower markets, hoping to lose themselves in the noise and chaos. Merchants shouted over each other, trying to sell glowing fruits, alien spices, and weapons displayed openly on the tables. The air was thick with the scent of burning oils and sweet smoke. Daniel spotted a vendor selling small mechanical parts and steered Kalira toward it. "We need to fix the tracker jammer," he said quietly. "If Veyron's people planted anything on you, this will keep them from finding us." Kalira kept watch while Daniel picked through the parts, but her hand went to his arm suddenly. "Don't look now," she murmured, "but we're being followed again." Daniel's grip tightened on the small metal piece he was holding. Where? 2 stalls back. Tall, green-skinned scar on the jaw, and another on the roof, left side. Daniel didn't turn his head, but his mind was already working. "We can't run here. Too many people. We take the alley behind the spice stand." They moved casually toward the narrow passage. The moment they stepped into the shadowed alley, the sound of the market faded. Kalira pulled the blade from her sleeve without a word. The first hunter appeared from the far end, blocking their way, while the one with the scar came in from behind. Both carried shock rifles, their faces hidden behind half-masks. The one in front spoke in a deep, mocking voice. "The noble sends his regards, human. You can walk away now. Leave the girl." Daniel stepped in front of Kalira. "Not happening." The hunter laughed. "You think you can protect her? You can't even protect yourself." Before he could move, Kalira lunged. She spun low, her blade slashing the rifle from his hand. Daniel took the chance to rush the other, swinging a metal pipe he had grabbed from the ground. The fight was brutal and close. Kalira moving like a storm, Daniel fighting with desperate force. The scarred hunter caught Daniel with a punch to the ribs, but Daniel didn't fall. He rammed his shoulder into the alien, knocking him against the wall. Kalira finished her opponent with a sharp twist of her blade, leaving him gasping on the ground. They ran before more could arrive, darting through twisting side streets until they reached the edge of the Neon District. Here, the air was colder, the streets less crowded. They slipped into the doorway of an abandoned workshop. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard. That was too close. Kalira wiped her blade clean on a rag she found on the floor. "It will happen again. Veyron won't stop sending them. We can't just keep running." He looked at her. "Then what do you suggest?" Her eyes met his, sharp and certain. "We strike back. We take the fight to them. If we hurt him once, he'll think twice about chasing us." Daniel thought about it. Running had kept them alive, but only barely. Fighting back would be dangerous, but it might be their only chance. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies: scrap metal, fuel cells, small explosives. Daniel's hands moved quickly, turning the workshop into a trap-building station. Kalira worked beside him, her movements precise. As they worked, she spoke in a quieter voice. "Where I come from, warriors fight for their own freedom. But no one has ever fought for mine, until you." Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. "You don't owe me anything, Kalira." She shook her head. "I owe you more than you understand." By nightfall, they had a plan. Daniel would lure a small group of Veyron's hunters into the old train tunnels, where they had set traps along the narrow paths. Kalira would wait in the shadows, striking when they were cornered. The hunters arrived faster than expected. Daniel's heart pounded as he ran through the tunnels, their footsteps echoing behind him. He jumped over a tripwire, and seconds later, the first trap went off, a burst of smoke that filled the air, blinding them. Kalira moved in silence, striking from the dark. The hunters fell one by one, confusion turning to panic. Daniel fought alongside her, the two of them moving like they had been training together for years. When the last hunter collapsed, Kalira looked at him, breathing hard but smiling slightly. "You fight like someone who's been in worse situations." Daniel gave a half smile. "I have, but never with someone like you watching my back." For the first time, her guarded expression softened into something real. "Then maybe we have a chance." The tunnels were silent after the fight, only the faint drip of water echoing through the darkness. Daniel leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead, while Kalira crouched beside one of the fallen hunters, checking for any signs of life. Her movements were quick, professional, almost like she had done this hundreds of times before. "They won't be the last," she said, standing up and sliding her blade back into its sheath. "Veyron will send more, and next time, he'll send worse." Daniel pushed himself away from the wall. Then we keep hitting them until he can't afford to send anyone. Kalira's eyes narrowed slightly. You speak like a soldier. Were you one? No, Daniel said after a pause, but I've survived enough battles to know that running forever just gets you caught in the end. They left the tunnels and made their way back to the abandoned workshop. The streets were quieter now, the neon lights casting long shadows across the wet pavement. Kalira kept glancing over her shoulder, her hand never far from her weapon. Inside the workshop, Daniel closed the door and began locking the makeshift barricades they had built. Kalira sat on the cot in the corner, her silver hair falling loose from her scarf. She watched him for a long moment before speaking. Why do this for me? You could have walked away after the auction. He hesitated, then shrugged slightly. Because I couldn't. That's not an answer, she pressed. Daniel set down the wrench he was holding and met her gaze. Because when I saw you in that cage, I saw someone who didn't belong there, someone who wasn't broken yet, and I didn't want to see you break. Her expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. You should know something about me. I'm not just from a warrior clan. I was meant to lead them. My capture was meant to destroy my people's will. If Veyron learns I'm alive and free, he'll see it as a threat, and he will come for both of us harder than before. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance. Before she could reply, the sound of metal scraping against the outside wall froze them both. Daniel signaled her to stay quiet and moved toward the door. The noise came again. Slow, deliberate. Someone was testing the barricade. The next second, the door shook as a heavy force slammed into it. Kalira was already moving, grabbing her blade and positioning herself by the side wall. Daniel picked up his wrench, the familiar weight steadying his hands. The door burst open with a crash, and 3 armored hunters rushed in. The fight was fast and violent, Kalira moving like a flash of silver, Daniel swinging with precision. One hunter grabbed Daniel by the collar and slammed him into the wall. But Daniel drove his knee into the alien's gut and smashed the wrench against his helmet. Kalira disarmed another with a sharp kick and finished him with a strike to the throat. The last one turned to run, but she was faster, grabbing him by the arm and twisting until he fell. She pressed her blade to his neck. Tell Veyron, she said coldly, that if he comes for us again, I will end him myself. She released him, and he stumbled out the door, clutching his side. Daniel locked the door again, breathing heavily. That won't scare him, he said. No, Kalira agreed, but it will make him angry enough to make a mistake. They spent the rest of the night reinforcing the workshop. Daniel worked on strengthening the barricades, while Kalira cleaned her blade and set small traps near the windows. They didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. As the first light of dawn touched the city, Kalira sat beside him on the floor. You've already risked your life twice for me, she said quietly. If Veyron catches you, he won't just kill you. He'll make an example of you. Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. Then we don't give him that chance. We end this before he can try. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. If we do this, there's no turning back. Once we strike, he'll hunt us until one of us is dead. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. Then we make sure it's him. For the first time, Kalira's guarded expression broke into something close to a smile. Not the cold, sharp kind she wore in the market, but something warmer, something that hinted she believed in him. That night, under the dim light of a single lamp, they began to plan the attack that could end everything. The plan was dangerous, but neither of them hesitated. Daniel had spent hours studying the maps Rask provided, tracing the narrow service tunnels that ran beneath Veyron's estate. Kalira memorized guard rotations, her sharp eyes catching details he would have missed. They worked in silence, both knowing that once they started, there would be no going back. The night was heavy with fog when they moved out. Daniel wore dark clothes and carried a small pack filled with explosives and tools. Kalira's silver hair was tied back, her blade strapped to her thigh. They didn't speak as they slipped through the sleeping streets, heading for the hidden entrance that would lead them into the noble's domain. The old drainage tunnel smelled of rust and stale water. The air was damp, and every step echoed too loudly in Daniel's ears. Kalira moved like a shadow ahead of him, her steps silent. When they reached the grate leading into the estate's lower levels, Daniel crouched and began loosening the bolts. His fingers were quick but careful. Any noise could alert the guards above. When the grate finally came free, they climbed into a narrow passage lit only by the faint glow of the estate's power lines. Somewhere above them, footsteps moved in steady patterns. Kalira motioned for him to follow, and they crept forward, staying low. They emerged into a small storeroom filled with crates of fine wine and sealed metal containers. Kalira closed the door behind them, then pointed to the far wall. "Veyron's chamber is above us," she whispered. "If we get there, we can end this." Daniel set the small explosives at the base of the wall, the soft click of each timer sounding far too loud in the stillness. When the charges were ready, they took cover behind the crates. A low, controlled blast shook the floor, leaving a hole just large enough to climb through. They moved into the upper hallways, where the walls were lined with alien art, and the air smelled faintly of expensive oils. Kalira's blade flashed when a guard rounded the corner, and he dropped without a sound. Daniel took the guard's weapon and kept moving. Finally, they reached a set of tall double doors carved with silver patterns. Kalira pushed one open just enough to slip inside. Veyron was there, sitting in a high-backed chair, sipping from a crystal glass as if he had been waiting for them. "I knew you couldn't resist coming here," he said, his voice calm but dripping with arrogance. "The human who thinks he can steal from me, and the runaway who doesn't know her place." Daniel stepped forward, the stolen weapon steady in his hands. "Her place isn't with you." Veyron's smile was cold. "You think you can kill me and walk away? My reach goes far beyond this city. Even if you succeed, my allies will hunt you until your bones turn to dust." Kalira's eyes locked on him. "Then we start with you." The fight was fast and brutal. Veyron moved like a trained warrior, drawing a curved blade from the table beside him. He struck with precision, forcing Daniel back, but Kalira was faster. She darted in, her blade clashing with his in a storm of sparks. Daniel circled, looking for an opening. When Veyron drove Kalira back toward the wall, Daniel lunged, slamming into him and knocking the noble off balance. Kalira didn't waste the moment. Her blade cut clean, sending Veyron to his knees. "You should have stayed in your cage," Veyron hissed, blood on his lips. "I was never yours," she said coldly, and with one final strike, it was over. The room fell silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Daniel glanced toward the door. "We need to move before the whole estate comes down on us." Kalira nodded, and together they retraced their path through the halls, moving faster now. The explosions Daniel had set earlier began to go off, shaking the walls and filling the air with smoke. Guards shouted somewhere in the distance, but they didn't stop to look back. They escaped into the drainage tunnel just as the estate alarms began to wail. By the time they emerged onto the dark streets, the fog had grown thicker, hiding them from view. They didn't stop running until they reached the outskirts of the city. There, under the shadow of an old watchtower, they finally slowed. Daniel leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "It's done," he said, almost in disbelief. Kalira stood beside him, her expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, she turned to face him. "You didn't just save my life, Daniel. You gave me back my freedom." He met her gaze. "And what will you do with it?" Her eyes softened. "I could go anywhere, start over. But," she stepped closer, "I'd rather stay with the one who fought for me when no one else would." Daniel didn't answer right away, but the faint smile on his face was enough. They left the city together before sunrise, walking side by side toward a horizon that held no chains, no cages, only whatever future they chose to make.